So one of the most important factors for aquariums is obviously light. So depending on the amount of direct sunlight that comes in, that is a factor. But improving your light would make a massive difference. The plants that are currently in this tank are not super high light plants. So if you get everything else right, even though your lights are pretty average, you're still going to get a good result out of this tank. But if you want a more diverse, more lush, and more beautiful display of plants, you want to up your lighting. So I would say as a minimum, I'd probably look at, say, 2 Aquarel LED plant lights. Otherwise, there's some much better and more expensive and fancier options that you could look at. So it's all relative to what you want to keep in the tank. These particular plants, particularly if they're getting a bit of natural sunlight, are not really light focused. And the problems of this tank is much more due to circulation, CO2, phosphate, and various other issues. Now, one thing I'm going to recommend we do is raise this up, and then what that's going to do is give us better surface agitation. So we're just going to go like that. And then that agitation is going to be an absolutely wonderful thing to ensure that the aquarium has better water flow. So I'm just going to angle it off in that way, because that one should be shooting this way, and if I get this one shooting this way, hopefully they're working with each other, not against each other. And that agitation there is going to be wonderful for increasing your dissolved oxygen level, and that dissolved oxygen level will increase the redox potential, and then the increased redox potential will help to get the nitrite down and will help all of the good bacteria that should be growing in the filters. And once again, once the filters are given a clean, then all of this crap is going to be taken out of the water. And I'm going to add some polyfilter into the filter right now. And polyfilter is basically God's gift to fish tanks, because polyfilter starts white, then it adsorbs and absorbs anything impure out of the water, and then eventually it ends up black, and that means that it's time to replace. So in this tank, I'd expect it to last several months, but in the condition of this tank, I would probably be happy if it lasted a month. Now, one thing I highly recommend doing is we can put you on our service rotation call, and what we can do is we can just give you a call once a month and check in with you with how your aquarium's going. Now, if you're on top of it, then you just go, oh, everything's cool, chat next month. And then other times, you actually know that we're going to call. So some people will say, oh, I actually did it because I knew you were going to call. And then other times, the reality is you're just too busy. And your best intentions is to look after your tank, but often you just don't. The other thing too about aquarium maintenance is the amount of delusion that runs with it. For example, it's so common that someone will say, I do my tank every week, but maybe they're not doing the right thing every week. Maybe they're doing too much every week, or very often they're not even doing it every week. It's really common that someone will say, I do my tank every week, and then the wife will go, oh, I haven't seen you do it for a month. Like, you can honestly believe in your head that you're doing something, but unless you're writing down when you're doing it, it's very possible that you're just not actually doing that. So we can just give you a call once a month. If you're under control, then it's all good. On the other hand, if you're just too busy, you're just too lazy, you're just too distracted, then you can always go, hey, just come over. We then can pop over, we can give the whole thing a service. And sometimes that's a really big ease off your mind, because sometimes the thought of knowing that you have to do it is actually worse than doing it. So if you just get on with it and get it done, it's really not that bad. But it's those times when you know you haven't had time, you know you're too busy, you know you've got other priorities in your life, and then it sort of like burdens you. So I highly recommend, if you're in Sydney Metro, give Majestic Aquariums calls. Tell us that you want a phone call every month. And in those times when you're too busy, then we can take up the slack for you. We can give the tank a service. and we can sort of get that off your plate, because sometimes you have better things to do than clean fish tanks, and other times you might actually enjoy it. Now, with the disease on these tetras here, increased quality of food and increased quality water quality is the real solution here. But there's medications that you can try, but there's another product called Vugel, which is a really great option for options like this. Vugel is actually an artificial immune stimulant, and I've found it to be really quite good. So increased water quality, increased quality of nutrients, and then consider Vugel. Other than that, there are various medications, but I tend to go with medications as a last resort. Now, if you ever see aggression with your discus, one option is take out the aggressors, and in this case, it looks like it's a pair of them. So removing the pair into the other tank is going to be an option, and that may work, or it may mean the aggressive one just bashes the other one, depending on the temperament of the actual discus. Now, discus in the wild live in fairly decent groups. So they do sort of have a pecking order amongst each other. So one thing that you could do with this aquarium is improve the water quality, improve the nutrients, and then add more fish. Especially if you put one in that's a little bit bigger and more dominant than your current dominant fish. And having extra discus in there disperses the aggression and makes them tend to get along better. When you've got less of them, you find they're more shy, they're more territorial, and they're more aggressive, because they're naturally used to living together and they feel safer, and they tend to be less aggressive when they're actually living together. So adding extra discus may actually be an option. The other thing is how well your fish get along is only ever going to be governed by the dominant fish. If you have a really good boss in your aquarium, you'll tend to have a really good aquarium. If you've got Adolf Hitler run your country, then you're in trouble, because what he'll tend to do is just wear down one of the fish. So he might go for the Jews, and then once he's finished with them, he'll go for the Polish, and then eventually you'll end up with none. So it's really important that you watch who the boss is. Now, the other thing about these fish is that if you get the boss fish and you put a new fish in to become the boss, very often the old boss stops being a problem. And the other thing is that you can get that boss and then go put him in a whole new aquarium, and then he can often not cause any trouble at all. Like, for example, if Hitler is the Chancellor of Germany, this is a big problem. But if he was an accountant, probably wasn't a big problem. He'd just probably stuff up a few people's books, and it wouldn't be the end of the world. So understanding the dynamics of your fish really helps you to make sure that they get along okay. And in general, when you get more, they feel safer and they're less aggressive. When you have less, they feel more vulnerable and they're more aggressive. Now, the best way to make sure that your tank looks like crap is make sure your filter looks like crap. So what I'd recommend doing this is giving the filter a really good clean. Then I'd want to have a really good look at what the media is down there. At the moment, it just looks like there's some sort of noodles. Now, I'm not really a big fan of them, because your noodles are going to break ammonia into nitrate. This tank doesn't have a nitrate problem right now, so it's not really the end of the world. If you decreased your water changes, then it might be. There are far better media such as Marine Pure. Marine Pure offers parallel denitrification. So what I'd be wanting to use is I'd throw that filter wall out. I'd consider putting some polyfilter in there. Polyfilter will also help to strip out all the nutrients and organics out of the aquarium. Will do a wonderful job of polishing the tank. And then I would consider low priority giving the replacing the noodles with Marine Pure. And then I want to give the pump a good clean too. Give the impeller a clean. Make sure that that's all pumping properly. And I definitely want to clean that outlet, because right now that's just got so much crap all over it. The best thing this tank could have is a nice big overhaul. A bit of a restart. Now, as far as aggressive fish are concerned, if the aggressive fish is not injuring the other fish in any way, shape or form, if he's just giving it a little bit of a pushy push, then that's actually not bad. For example, if you watch a backyard full of dogs, you could easily say that they were acting aggressively. They're jumping on each other, they're biting each other, they're barking at each other, they're growling at each other, but actually they're getting along fine. So as long as you're not seeing ripped fins, you're not seeing them panting and breathing really heavily after the interaction, as long as the eyes are clear, the scales are clear, the fins are clear, and they're not actually damaging each other, then that behaviour, even though it may be aggressive behaviour, actually may not actually be a problem. It's only if after the interaction you see the subdominant one hide away and breathe heavy. That's usually an indication that the bully is stressing the other fish. If that is not the case and he just swims off and he seems fine, then what you're interpreting as aggression may actually not be a problem. The other thing is that fish may be the dominant fish and he may actually be good because he might just give everyone a chase and not hurt anyone. And it's quite possible you might get rid of him, then find that the fish next in line for dominance is actually worse. So if the fish are not injuring each other, then it isn't necessarily a problem.